U.S. elections are some of the most expensive in the world, with an administration cost of more than $2 billion each year. And yet, with all that money invested, 38% of Americans still lack confidence in election fairness. The truth is, voting systems around the world, not just in the US, are drastically outdated, vulnerable, and inefficient. With the system so critical to democracy, it is paramount that we implement better solutions to restore trust in governments around the world. Hello, I am your host, Mike Lake, and today I will be speaking with Tim Gargan about the value of trust in the public and private sectors and how his company, Horizon State, is rebuilding that trust and confidence in both.
Innovation, resiliency, discovery. Join Mike Lake, President and CEO of Leading Cities, as we explore the technologies shaping the possibilities of our future with a preview of tomorrow.
Hello, welcome, Tim. Thank you so much for joining us. And once again, of course, I want to welcome all of our viewers and listeners. I'm so excited to introduce you to Tim Gargan, the CEO of Horizon State. Now, this is a company that provides ultra-secure elections and engagement services that for the first time allow the public full transparency and oversight of that process. Now, Tim, before we talk about the security of elections and the value of trust, tell me, how did you get into this issue and introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers?
Hey, well, firstly, thank you very much for having me, Michael. So I first came along, joined the blockchain space in 2014, a very long time ago, and started working in the space. I've been a real passionate evangelist for the technology and the many things that it can solve. And one of the huge things I always thought of was electronic voting and just the level of transparency and trust it could allow the public to have with our political leaders. And of course, that extends beyond just government, but through to corporations, unions, like everyone has to do voting all the time. And it's really important that we're actually able to trust who holds these super important jobs and roles that make decisions ultimately that are the most important decisions that we make as a society, and they affect us. So that's kind of what drew me down the voting arch of this industry. And now here I find myself at the helm of Horizon State, surrounded by a great team who are all looking to achieve the same result, which is free and fair elections and everyone being able to see what's going on for themselves.
And, well, first of all, thank you again for joining us and joining us from Australia. So I know it's quite a few hours ahead. So I do appreciate that. But I mean, clearly there's been in the US alone, there's been a lot of talk over the last year or so about the fairness of elections, the security of elections, the trust in elections. One of the things that I have said on many occasions is that in today's world, facts are just the details of life, but perception is reality. And the perception of a unfair election has, as we have seen, some very serious consequences. Tell us a little bit more about what is the state of things in terms of trust or in terms of election security, whether in the US or anywhere in the world.
Well, you've touched on a massive issue, and to keep my answer very brief, we see like that there is a massive level of distrust, or growing distrust, is a better way to phrase it, in our government institutions. So many people do not trust what they're told when it comes to anything that the government tells them. So whether that be public sentiment shared by the government that they collected through, say, surveys or polls. So they just disengage. And the quality of decisions that any public or private organization can make is actually limited by the quality of the information that it collects from the public. So when you get less engagement, it really affects that quality. So ultimately, when governments and corporations make decisions using incomplete information, they actually risk misallocating many millions or even billions of dollars that could have better served the public in a much better way. And when it comes to the election point, it's that another huge problem is that many people don't have faith that the government can operate elections fairly and independently. And this definitely isn't helped by current election processes having minimal, if any, public oversight. So there's no way to know if your vote was lost off the back of a truck, if an election system working in an area that heavily swings to one side politically decided to throw out thousands of ballots. We don't know if illegitimate ballots were accepted, or if software errors like those that were widely reported in the recent US election affected the final result. So we've seen the effect of these uncertainties and distrust as recently as January this year, with many Republicans in the United States at the Capitol riots. And we actually saw the same thing with Democrats after the election before that in 2016, which they also insisted was stolen from them. So now it kind of appears that trust in the integrity of our elections is at least partially attributable to a person's political leanings and how they align with the team that's actually in power. And this has the potential, I think, to alienate around half of the population in many countries around the world, and actually indicates that the perception of how secure an election is actually just as important as how secure it actually is. And that's what we're really trying to solve.
And obviously, at least as I know it, the main difference between the 2016 and 2020 elections was 2020 was really about the election itself. The 2016 was more about the influence based on outside influence, outside news, fake stories, fake news, et cetera, et cetera. Does this level of trust that we're talking about, I mean, it's not just in the system itself, but it's also about all of this that surrounds an election as well. Yeah. Is that right?
That's exactly right. And so at the moment, we're trying to solve a particular area of that problem, but also the level of information that people have access to in a world full of fake news and information that we can't really trust, which is actually another core use case of our technology and what we actually try to solve. What we're also trying to do is provide, while we can't control the information that people have access to, we can provide a public ledger, because we are a Australian blockchain startup, and we can provide people with a database where they can be confident that all of the information that's actually been sent to it is legitimate. Everyone that posted information there, like say a vote, everyone had the right to put their vote there, and it's all done privately, and they can at least trust all the information that is there, rather than just going on the word of some like unknown power that be that just says this is 70% of you wanted this and yada yada. But yeah, that is a fair point. But I think I think I saw even in Texas only today there's 500 unheard court cases of electoral fraud and impropriety, and I think there was a conviction just today from the midterms in 2018, and so it's like it's not like a new problem. And even in the 2016 election, and even lead up to the one just before, both sides were going at it in regards to how fair they thought it was going to be, and whether having the other team in power meant that they would be able to have like a fair result in the end.
I remember as far back as 2004, 2000, of course, we had the whole disaster with Florida and hanging Chads and that debacle. And then 2004, right after it, we had, the CEO of a electronic voting machine say he would do anything in his power to make sure President Bush was reelected, which, I mean, just a statement like that causes the public to wonder how much they can trust the results of his machines.
Oh yeah.
And that's another segue, just to say that this is not just applicable to electoral systems. I mean, trust is important no matter what relationship we're talking about, including not just citizens with government, but also consumers with business. And I think that was the challenge in 2004, is that you had, the electorate that was essentially the consumer for an electronic voting system having distrust in the company. So companies could really be using the same type of technology to build trust with their customers. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Do you see that use case, I mean?
Yeah, that's actually one of our primary use cases, and what we really see is that pretty much any organization that has more than like 1 or 2 people in it has to do some type of vote at some time during the year. So with a large enterprise, for example, they got lots of shareholders, they need to do votes with them, circular resolutions, yearly AGMs. They have employees, they do all kinds of surveys on, workplace culture, pay rises, enterprise bargaining agreements with them. You got unions and stuff like that, but particularly in the enterprise use case, what we find is that if you can create a system that increases trust the more frequently that an organization uses it. So if you have secure elections and you regularly engage with the public, they're more likely to trust you. And when you earn more trust from your consumer base, you get more brand loyalty, and that tends to be reflected in your, profitability and long-term success.
Excellent points. So I want to jump into Horizon State because I could keep talking about this challenge for a long time, and I've already probably spent too much time on it, but I do want to hear specifically about Horizon State and what you're doing to combat this problem.
Okay, so Horizon State is an Australian blockchain startup, and we've set out to repair the public's growing distrust of government and to restore faith in our election systems. So we do this by helping political and business leaders alike, which we were just speaking about, or in fact anyone else that needs to host an election or survey to commit to openness, transparency, and accountability. And they do that through our secure election and engagement platform. So one of the core things that we understand is that people tend to trust what they can see for themselves, rather than just what like some unknown group of people in power tell them. And we also know that organizations are much more likely to be accountable when the data that they are making decisions from and the actions that they are taking are both being observed by the public, which is the core reason that we employ blockchain technology. Our system itself has been used in the past by the South Australian state government for a Fisheries Council election, and also a New Zealand government department for a housing redevelopment project there. There's also been a few political parties, councils, etc. But in 2018, the company was recognized by the World Economic Forum as a leading technology pioneer. And at the moment, we're currently undertaking an equity crowdfund that is open to Australian retail investors and to sophisticated investors worldwide that meet their local accredited investor requirements. And we're doing that through a company called Equitize. And by completing that round, that will help us to operationalize the business and commercialize the product that we've built. And that's pretty much what Horizon State's about.
Well, and walk us through a little bit like that user experience. What does it mean to have a blockchain-based electoral or polling system?
Okay, so should probably say what blockchain, explain what blockchain is first. But essentially the way that we get this gain in security and transparency, which lets everyone see what's going on end to end, which is what actually the mechanism that we build public trust, is our use of blockchain technology. And what a blockchain is it's a publicly accessible database that anyone can view from any computer that they like, or web browser, and they can verify information on it, and they can be sure that all the information that is there is trustworthy. That's the core idea. So by putting election data on a blockchain, lets the public see that their votes were recorded and counted correctly, and that their responses in, say, surveys or polls were actually taken into account in the formation of public policy and other organizational decision making. So basically, if you voted for one candidate and you go look at your vote on the blockchain and it's different, the entire election could be called into question. So we kind of offer that sort of additional layer of protection and also comfortability. But in terms of like the user journey, we've put a lot of effort into making our user interface as elegant and easy to use, making it as easy to use as possible. So it's kind of just like any other web application that you or I have been used to using for like the last decade. And what we actually do is we take care of the more technical blockchain processing aspects of it. And we do that on behalf of the user in the background. And we think this was a really important step to get the thing adopted and used by the mainstream, because the entire point of an internet solution like elections, polls, and surveys is that they're more convenient and more people can take part. But if you have this highly technical, is special knowledge required, and even if 10% of the people can't use it, it kind of eliminates the entire point of creating an accessible online system. So basically, making it simple was the most important thing, and we put a lot of thought into that user journey. So yeah, essentially, you just come along, cast your vote, just like any other app, and we take care of the rest, and then we provide the link where the user can view their vote on the blockchain. And there's a few other like important probably things to mention, but the main one's probably that we take user privacy really seriously. We don't collect any metadata on our users. We require minimal personal information for users to authenticate using our system, because any system requires some type of KYC or authentication of the users to make sure that they are who they say they are, and that kind of stuff. And we use cryptography to hide the identity of anyone who uses a vote on the blockchain. So when someone casts a vote on the blockchain, it doesn't say Tim Gargan voted for George Bush or something. It says like 12894B63, and it just goes on and on and on. And so for every single person that votes, we hash their name into a big long string of letters and numbers. And what we actually do is we encourage customers or organizations to do the same thing. So basically, they will get my name, Tim Gargan, they'll turn it into a big string of numbers like 18563 yada yada. And then when Horizon State is given these hashes, we then hash them again, and then we allow users through the platform. And what that actually does is it means that the user knows who they are because they're given a link to the blockchain, and they know what their hash code is. But the organization that is hosting the vote has no idea who voted or how they voted, and Horizon State also does not know who voted or how they voted. The only thing that either of us knows is that everyone who did vote was eligible to vote. And that's really important from a security perspective, because one, it's not very common in our industry. Most of our peers digitally fingerprint and collect all kinds of user information like date of birth, photo ID, photos of their ID, and that kind of stuff. But by having the least amount of information possible, it basically means that there's no honeypot of information for someone to try and attack and gain access to. So we really remove ourselves as a target. So that's a really key feature as well.
So clearly you're building that trust and confidence in the system. Listen, we're already really out of time, but in 10 seconds or so, thinking into the future, 10, 20, 30 years, what does it mean if the world and democracies around the world, for instance, were using this system? What's the impact?
I think the most important impact overall would be that every single person that is in a position of power and has the ability to make decisions that affect everything from about what you and I do, what laws should be passed or what money should be spent on, they are forced to be much more accountable to the public, because all the information that they are making decisions from is available to you and I. And if they try and mislead us in any way, we can catch them out and we can vote them out at the next election, which is a really key point. And also we can be sure, just by the virtue of the transparency of the system, that everyone that does have one of these positions of power is actually entitled to be there.
Fantastic. Listen, Tim, I want to thank you for your time and really thank you and the whole team for the work you're doing to build this trust and confidence in our governments and in our corporations on a global scale. It's been a pleasure to have you here today on Preview of Tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Michael. Cheers.
And thank you for tuning in to this episode of Preview of Tomorrow. Listeners like you are essential to advancing our efforts to drive resiliency and sustainability for all. I ask that you give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or whichever streaming platform you prefer. Your feedback helps us to grow and share these brief previews of what life in the future can be. In addition to thanking our guest today, I want to thank Peter Roy and Demetria Bridges for making this podcast possible. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and encourage others to also join us each week in previewing the possibilities of tomorrow.
Preview of Tomorrow is brought to you by Leading Cities, a global nonprofit driving resilience and sustainability for all by unleashing the potential of the world's cities. Join them at leadingcities.org.